I don't need another color classic. I don't need another color classic. I don't need another color classic. I bought another color classic. Really, I can stop anytime I want, but I just couldn't pass this one up, not only because it's in good shape, but also due to what came along with it. An add-in card that fixes the Color Classic's biggest complaint. First though, I needed to get the machine working. It was said to not power on, which is certainly common in Macs from the early 90s like this one. There are two main parts, the motherboard and so-called analog board, and it's the latter that I chose to investigate first. The analog board serves as both the Color Classic's power supply as well as what drives the CRT. Of course, failed electrolytic capacitors are the thing to check first, and while I didn't see any obvious signs they had gone bad, that doesn't exonerate them. These are good quality parts, 105 degree rated even, but it's been over 30 years and nothing lasts forever. So the analog board came out so I could look closer. There are a lot of caps on this board, but screw it, let's just replace them all. As I got to desoldering in a few spots, I got a whiff of the telltale fishy smell that means electrolyte has leaked. Even if this doesn't get the computer working, it's still a job that needed to get done anyway. This big 330 microfarad cap is optional to replace. It's pretty uncommon for them to fail, and replacements are kind of expensive, but for the sake of completeness, I swapped it anyway. I also decided to replace a couple of other components, specifically diodes and resistors that are known to run hot, as you can tell by the discoloration on the PCB. There's a thread about this on the Tinker Different forums with suggested replacements, and I added them to a parts list on DigiKey in case you need to tackle the same repair with your own Color Classic. The links to both are in the description. When installing these new parts, it's important to keep them raised up from the board so they can get better airflow for cooling. It's kind of a tight fit in some spots, especially with the new caps in place, but it all worked out. There were a couple instances of trace damage I needed to fix elsewhere on the analog board, places where pads got lifted or weakened from cap leakage, but I was able to get them fixed up. This analog board should be good for at least another 30 years now. The motherboard, or logic board as Apple calls them, also needed some TLC. In addition to the expansion card, it looks like a previous owner also bumped up the RAM, which was a common upgrade. Before going further with the repair, I decided to give the board a good cleaning, which means soaking it in isopropyl alcohol for a couple hours. These cheap free toothbrushes you get from the dentist are useful for gently scrubbing the board to remove the years of dust and, increasingly likely, leaked capacitor electrolyte. With the board out of its bath and fully dried, I got to work on recapping it. I found it best to replace these surface mount electrolytics without question. Even if they're not bad now, they likely will be soon, so just get it over with. There was plenty of electrolyte leakage to clean up, but overall, the board looked good. Nothing horrific in terms of damage. I got tantalum caps installed in their place. Yes, I'm fully aware they're not a perfect solution, but I find them easier to work with, and not having to worry about liquid electrolyte again is nice peace of mind. Overall, I was happy with how the repair went, so the motherboard went back in, and I hit the power button, and we appear to be in business. It didn't want to boot from its internal hard drive, which I was kind of expecting, but I also noticed that the screen image needed a little adjustment. I had picked up a set of non-conductive tools a while back, so it was quick work to get the image centered. Much better. I plugged in an external Blue SCSI and the Color Classic had no problems booting from it. The mechanical drives these machines shipped with are prone to failure now, and after getting to the desktop and running utility to show the SCSI bus, it seemed pretty clear the drive itself was dead. It just wasn't showing up at all. No worries, let's get the machine apart again so I can replace it. It's a little tricky to remove the drive in a Color Classic, but I managed to fish it out while only cutting my hands up a little bit. It's an 80 megabyte model from Quantum, and Apple cleverly used a slide-in bracket to secure it. So I whipped up a 3D printed replacement to use with a Blue SCSI since the mounting holes are different. I've thrown a link to the model in the video description if you could use one too. Instead of putting in another clock battery that's prone to explode, I threw in the last of my Meow Toast adapters, which use CR2032 coin cells instead. The upgraded RAM went back in as well, and like before, the Color Classic booted just fine. Except it wouldn't see the new drive I installed. SCSI Probe knew something was there on ID 0, but it wasn't communicating correctly. What was wrong? In the Color Classic, both the internal and external SCSI ports share the same bus, and thus the same SCSI controller chip. Since the external port was working fine, this pointed me in the direction of it being a connectivity problem with the internal port. I used the schematics to continuity test the connections from the controller chip to the edge connector, and found that one was broken. Turns out one via suspiciously close to a capacitor had gone bad from leaked electrolyte. I managed to bodge around it on the bottom of the board and crossed my fingers.
Oh, hell yes!
Awesome, that's a good sign. And SCSI Probe shows the drive now too, so we should be all set. I went to install an operating system on the internal Blue SCSI, and the process reminded me of the Color Classic's biggest criticism, both now and when it was new. This thing is ridiculously slow. The Color Classic launched in early 1993 and came with a 16 MHz Motorola 68030 processor. That wasn't cutting edge at the time, but still a decent option for a consumer-focused computer. Problem is, Apple took a shortcut when designing its motherboard, adapting the architecture from the Mac LC2. But this also brought over its limitations. The biggest of these was the fact that while the 68030 was a 32-bit CPU, the bus between it and the RAM was only 16 bits wide. This meant that the CPU had to read data from RAM in 2 passes, slowing it down dramatically. The insult added to injury is that Apple limited the system ROM to only address a total of 10 megabytes of RAM, severely limiting upgrades. Third parties couldn't do anything to fix these issues, but they could try to work around them in the form of accelerator cards, like this Power Cache module from Daystar. It holds a 33 MHz 68030, doubling the machine's clock speed, and adds a math coprocessor, which was otherwise missing from the system. It won't work in the Color Classic as is because it has a different PDS connector, and a bit more obviously, the motherboard wouldn't be able to slide in with it installed. But Daystar offered an adapter for machines like this, so I got it all connected and fired the computer up. It booted just fine, and I was able to install the control panel for the card, then reboot. This control panel is pretty simple, just offering toggles to turn off the upgrade should you run into an application that wasn't compatible. But it detected the card correctly, so that meant I could kick off some benchmarks. A few minutes later, and we're seeing promising results, over double the number from a stock system. But that's not the only upgrade option I had available to explore. Remember that add-in card that came with this machine? It's from one of Daystar's competitors called Applied Engineering. AE had gotten its start in 1979 as an accessory maker for the Apple II line of computers, and throughout the 80s garnered a solid reputation. By the 1990s, it started making Mac upgrades like this one, the Transwarp 4300. It's similar to the Power Cache in that it has its own CPU and option for an FPU, but it's different in that it's faster with a 40 MHz chip. How big of a difference would that make? Let's find out. Power cache out, transwarp in, trash the Daystar control panel, and copy over the Applied Engineering one, then reboot. This one gives a few more options you can toggle if needed, and also seems to be detecting the upgrade correctly. Benchmark time and... damn, yeah, this thing is definitely faster. And back when it was new, that speed definitely cost you. In January of 1994, the transwarp card cost $400, at a time when the Color Classic itself was selling for $1,200. But as vintage computing has grown in popularity, so have accelerators like these, with prices to match, like this one on eBay for $250 US. Yeah, it offers a good speed boost, but is that kind of money really worth it for a vintage Mac? So that's where our third option comes into play. It's a brand new accelerator from Karo's Mac Mods called the CC Booster, and it's meant to be a cost-effective way to speed up your Color Classic or LC2. Like the Power Cache card, it includes a 33 MHz 68030 under the heatsink, and I chose to option mine with an FPU as well. And as an added bonus, it doesn't need any special software. Question is, how does it stack up? Let's fire up MacBench again and find out. The CC Booster is in the middle of the pack, about 30 percentage points faster than a stock machine, but trailing behind the two vintage upgrades. At first glance, this doesn't make sense. The booster is the same 33 MHz as the Power Cache, so why don't they have the same results? It all comes down to a trick that Daystar and Applied Engineering played to get around that lame 16-bit bus. There's a daughter board on the transwarp card that spells it all out. There's some cache memory here. With the Power Cache, it's right there in its name, with 32 kilobytes of cache built into the card. In both cases, the CPU cache gives a dramatic boost to performance, but this also was a big factor in those cards' costs. The CC Booster is a simpler device and doesn't include the same cache, but makes up for it in another way. This thing is honestly priced really well for what it does. I paid $110 for the card, including the FPU add-on. And for $18 more, you can bundle another nice-to-have upgrade in the form of a video RAM module. A stock Color Classic can only display 8-bit video or 256 colors. Adding another 256 kilobytes of VRAM bumps this to 16-bit or over 32,000 colors, which makes for an overall nicer experience, especially in some games. I had one more benchmark to run though, and it was on this: Apple's answer to the complaints about the Color Classic's performance. I picked up this Performa 275, also sold as the Color Classic 2, a couple of years ago. It looks the same as the original, but has a major difference in that the motherboard was completely redesigned, sharing it with the Mac LC550. In addition to doubling the 68030 clock speed to 33 MHz, it also fixed the bottleneck by going with a full 32-bit memory bus. As you'd expect, the Color Classic 2 pulls ahead of the CC Booster in benchmarks, but in the bigger picture, it's faster than everything we've looked at other than the transwarp. It's clearly a great option if you're looking at the numbers, but there's an unfortunate catch. For some reason, Apple limited sales of the Color Classic 2 and Performa 275 to only Japan, parts of Asia, and Canada, and it didn't sell in very big numbers in any of those. As such, these machines are hard to come across these days, and if you do find one, it won't be cheap. In the end, there are several options available if you either have a Color Classic or want to get one. To get the ultimate speed out of a stock machine, the higher-end vintage upgrade cards are a good choice, but you'll pay for the privilege. For the rest of us though, if you're looking for a performance bump on a budget, the CC Booster is the way to go. If you liked the video, I'd appreciate a thumbs up and be sure to subscribe. Here's another episode you should check out, and as always, thanks for watching.